The morning sun filtered through the dense canopy of oaks and maples as I laced up my running shoes on the edge of the forest trail. The cool mountain air filled my lungs, and I stretched my arms toward the sky, ready for another invigorating jog. This trail outside Asheville had become my escape, a place where I could lose myself in the rhythmic pounding of my feet against the packed dirt. "All right, let's do this," I muttered to myself, pulling my phone from my pocket to start my timer. The trailhead was deserted this early, which suited me fine. I preferred the solitude, the quiet hum of nature over the chatter of other hikers or joggers. I took off at a light pace, my breath steady, the sound of my sneakers crunching against the gravel breaking the silence. The forest was alive with its usual symphony, birds chirping, leaves rustling in the breeze, the occasional distant caw of a crow. Sunbeams danced on the trail, casting dappled shadows that shifted as I moved. The familiar sights and sounds lulled me into a comforting rhythm, and I let my mind wander. About half a mile in, the trail began to climb gently. I pushed myself, focusing on my breathing, my muscles warming as the incline tested my endurance. The faint scent of pine mixed with the earthy aroma of damp soil, and I felt a small smile tug at the corners of my mouth. "You've got this." "Mark," I encouraged myself. Rounding a bend, I slowed to a brisk walk to catch my breath. That's when I noticed how quiet it had suddenly become. The cheerful chirping of the birds had ceased, and the usual rustling in the underbrush was replaced by an unsettling stillness. I stopped and glanced around, scanning the trail and the woods on either side. Probably nothing, I told myself, though my heart began to beat a little faster. A rustle in the bushes about 20 feet ahead made me freeze. My eyes locked onto the dense shrubbery. Every muscle in my body tensed. I held my breath, waiting to see if a squirrel or rabbit would dart out, but nothing emerged. "Just a critter," I whispered, more for my own reassurance than anything else. I took a cautious step forward, but the crunch of my foot on the gravel felt unnaturally loud. Another rustle, this time louder, sent a chill down my spine. "Hey!" I called, my voice breaking the silence. "Anyone there?" Silence. I took a few steps closer, craning my neck to peer into the underbrush. That's when I saw it, a flash of black fur, just for an instant. My heart plummeted. It wasn't a squirrel or a rabbit. "Shit," I breathed, stepping back slowly. The underbrush erupted as the black bear surged onto the trail. It was massive, far larger than I had imagined, its powerful limbs propelling it forward with alarming speed. My survival instincts kicked in, and I turned to run, but I barely managed a few steps before I felt a heavy impact slam into my side. I hit the ground hard. The wind knocked out of me as pain shot through my ribs. I gasped, struggling to breathe, my vision swimming as I tried to make sense of what was happening. The bear loomed over me, its dark eyes reflecting the dappled sunlight. "Help!" I croaked, my voice weak and panicked. The bear growled low, a deep rumbling sound that vibrated in my chest. It swiped at me, its massive paw catching my shoulder and tearing through my jacket. Pain seared through me, and I instinctively raised my arms to protect my head and neck. "Stay calm," I whispered to myself, though I could barely think over the roar of my own heartbeat. The bear sniffed the air, its nose inches from my face. I could see the sheen of its black fur, the sharp glint of its teeth as it bared them, in another guttural growl. My body trembled as I lay as still as possible, praying it would lose interest. After what felt like an eternity, the bear backed up slightly, still watching me with those intense, unreadable eyes. I didn't dare move. I could feel the warm trickle of blood down my arm where its claws had grazed me, but the pain was secondary to the overwhelming fear gripping me. Suddenly the bear huffed and stood on its hind legs, towering over me. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to remember everything I'd read about bear encounters. "Don't run," I muttered. "Make yourself small. Don't make eye contact." The bear dropped back onto all fours with a heavy thud, its gaze still fixed on me. My mind raced, searching for a way out, but I knew there was no outrunning it, no hiding from it. All I could do was wait and hope it would decide I wasn't worth its time. The bear let out a final snort before turning and loping back into the woods, its massive form disappearing into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. I lay there for a moment, every nerve in my body on edge, before I finally dared to move. My hand trembled as I reached for my phone, fumbling to unlock it. "Oh God," I whispered, my voice shaking. I dialed 911, barely able to speak through the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I was attacked by a bear," I managed to choke out when the operator answered. "I'm on the Blue Ridge Trail near Asheville. Please, send help." The operator's calm voice tried to reassure me, but I barely heard her. My mind was still in the forest, still reliving every terrifying second. I struggled to sit up, wincing as pain shot through my ribs and shoulder. The bear was gone, but its presence lingered, imprinted in the jagged claw marks on my jacket and the blood seeping into the dirt. Help was on the way, but I knew that this moment, this brush with death, would haunt me long after the scars healed. The world around me blurred as I sat on the side of the trail, my chest rising and falling, in uneven gasps. The sharp ache in my ribs reminded me of the bear's impact, and every shift of my arm sent jolts of pain shooting from the claw marks on my shoulder. The forest was unnervingly quiet, as if nature itself had frozen in the wake of what had just happened. I couldn't stay here. That thought cut through the fog of my shock. The bear might still be nearby. With shaking hands, I pressed down on my bleeding shoulder, gritting my teeth against the sting. My phone slipped from my grasp, hitting the dirt with a dull thud. "Get it together, Mark," I muttered, forcing myself to focus. I picked up the phone and tried again. My fingers were slick with blood, but I managed to swipe the screen. No signal, of course. Out here, deep in the mountains, the cell service was unreliable at best. I glanced back down the trail, where the bear had vanished, half expecting to see it lumbering back toward me. My breathing quickened as the memory of its dark, unblinking eyes flashed through my mind. No time to waste. I had to move. Pushing myself to my feet, I winced as a sharp pain lanced through my side. "Damn it!" I hissed. I could feel the dull throb of what had to be a cracked rib. Each step sent another wave of discomfort through my body, but the urgency to put distance between myself and the bear overrode the pain. The trail ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, a winding path through the dense woods. Every shadow, every rustling leaf made me flinch. My ears strained for any sound that might signal the bear's return. My pulse thundered in my ears, and I found myself muttering under my breath, a mix of prayers and curses. As I trudged forward, the rustling of leaves caught my attention again. This time it wasn't distant. It was close. My heart leapt into my throat and I froze, scanning the trees. A sudden movement, a flash of black fur sent my adrenaline surging anew. "No, no, no!" I whispered, backing up slowly. My eyes darted from one side of the trail to the other, searching for an escape route. My mind raced with the grim reality. I wouldn't survive another encounter. "Mark!" a voice called, startling me so badly that I nearly stumbled. It was coming from somewhere ahead on the trail. "Here!" I shouted hoarsely, my throat dry and tight. "I'm here!" A moment later, two figures emerged from the bend in the trail. Hikers. One of them, a man with a weathered face and a green bandana tied around his neck, carried a sturdy hiking stick. The other, a woman in her 40s with a backpack, gasped when she saw me. "Holy crap, are you okay?" she asked, rushing forward. "I was attacked," I said, my voice shaky. "A bear, black bear." The man stepped closer, his eyes scanning the trees. "Where did it go?" he asked, gripping his hiking stick like a weapon. "I don't know," I admitted. "It ran off that way." I gestured weakly toward the thick underbrush to the left of the trail. The woman knelt beside me, her hands hovering as if unsure where to start. "You're bleeding pretty bad. We need to get you some help." I tried calling 911, I said, holding up my phone. "No service." The man frowned, pulling his own phone from a cargo pocket. He shook his head after a moment. "Same here. We're too far out. We'll have to get him to the trailhead." "I don't think I can make it," I admitted. Swaying slightly on my feet, the woman placed a firm hand on my uninjured arm. "You don't have to. We'll help you. Lean on me." Grateful but reluctant, I let her support me. The man took the lead, his stick tapping the ground rhythmically as he scanned the surroundings. "We'll keep an eye out for the bear," he assured me, though his tight grip on the stick betrayed his nerves. Each step was a challenge. The pain in my ribs flared with every jolt, and my legs felt like they could give out at any moment. The woman kept talking, her voice steady and calm, likely more for my sake than her own. "What's your name?" "Mark," I managed between labored breaths. "I'm Sarah," she said, "and that's Tom. Don't worry, Mark. We've got you. Just keep moving." The trail that had seemed so inviting this morning now felt like a gauntlet. Every shadow loomed larger. Every sound seemed ominous. The forest, which I had always found peaceful, now felt like a predator's domain. After what felt like an eternity, Tom held up a hand, signaling for us to stop. "Trailhead's just up ahead," he said. "You're gonna be okay, Mark." I nodded weakly, the world spinning slightly as exhaustion and pain began to take their toll. "Thank you," I whispered, barely able to get the words out. As we reached the clearing where the trailhead parking lot lay, the sight of a parked car brought a wave of relief. "We'll drive you to the hospital," Sarah said, already reaching for her keys. Tom helped me into the back seat, and I slumped against the worn fabric, grateful for the momentary reprieve. My eyes drifted to the trees lining the edge of the clearing. Somewhere out there, the bear was still roaming, a reminder of how fragile our place in the wilderness truly was. Tom drove with white knuckles gripping the steering wheel, his jaw set tight. Sarah sat beside me in the back seat, her hands hovering over the torn fabric of my blood-soaked jacket. "We'll be at the hospital soon," she said softly, her voice steady but her eyes filled with worry. "You're doing great, Mark. Just hang on." I nodded weakly, the adrenaline fading and the pain settling in like a cruel weight. My ribs felt as though they were on fire with every bump in the road, and the gashes on my shoulder throbbed with each beat of my heart. "You need to stay awake," Sarah added, her tone firm. "Talk to us. What's your last name?" "Ellis," I rasped, my throat dry and raw. "Mark Ellis." "Good," she said, giving a faint smile. "Where are you from, Mark?" "Asheville," I murmured. "Born and raised." Tom glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "You've lived around here your whole life and never had a run-in with a bear?" "Not like this," I said, wincing as the car hit a pothole. "I've seen them before. From a distance, they usually run off." "Not this time," Tom muttered. His tone was grim, and I could tell he was running through the same thoughts I was, how close I had come to not making it out of the woods. Sarah reached into her backpack and pulled out a water bottle. "Here, take a sip. You're losing a lot of blood and you're probably dehydrated." I took the bottle with trembling hands and sipped carefully, the cool water soothing my parched throat. "Thanks," I said, my voice still hoarse. The rest of the ride was quiet, save for the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the tires on loose gravel. I leaned my head back, eyes half closed, trying to focus on breathing through the pain. When we finally pulled into the emergency room parking lot, Tom killed the engine and jumped out. "I'll get someone," he said, disappearing through the sliding doors. Sarah helped me out of the car, her arm around my waist to steady me. The fluorescent lights of the hospital entrance were harsh, a stark contrast to the soft, shadowy woods. A pair of nurses hurried toward us with a wheelchair, their expressions shifting from professional calm to shock when they saw the blood staining my clothes. "Bear attack," Sarah explained quickly as they helped me into the chair. "We'll take it from here," one of the nurses said. "Sir, can you tell us your name?" "Mark Ellis," I replied, my voice steadier now but still weak. The nurse nodded and began checking my vitals as they wheeled me inside. The stark white walls and sterile smell of antiseptic were a blur as they moved me through the corridors and into a treatment room. "Tell me where you're hurt," the nurse said, her tone brisk but kind. "Ribs," I groaned. "Shoulder, clawed." A doctor entered, snapping on gloves. "Let's get those wounds cleaned and see what we're dealing with," he said. "Mark, I need you to hold as still as you can." Easier said than done. The moment they started cleaning the claw marks, I bit down hard on my lip to keep from crying out. The antiseptic burned like fire, and every touch sent fresh waves of pain radiating through my body. "You're lucky," the doctor said after. A moment, his voice calm but serious. "The wounds are deep, but nothing vital was hit. You'll need stitches and some time to heal, but you'll be okay." Lucky. The word felt strange, almost mocking. I hadn't felt lucky when the bear was on top of me, its claws tearing through my jacket like paper. As the doctor worked, stitching the gashes on my shoulder, Sarah and Tom appeared in the doorway, their faces pale but relieved. "How's he doing?" Sarah asked. He'll be fine with proper care, the doctor replied. The ribs might be fractured, but we'll confirm with x-rays. He's stable for now. Tom stepped closer, his hand resting on the back of a chair. You're a tough one, Mark, he said. Most people wouldn't have made it out of there. Yeah, I said, forcing a weak smile. Guess I had good timing running into you two. Right place, right time, Sarah agreed. We're just glad we found you when we did. The doctor finished stitching and stood back, peeling off his gloves. You'll need to stay overnight for observation, he said. We'll manage your pain and keep an eye on your vitals. After that, you'll have some follow-up appointments to make sure the wounds heal properly. Thanks, Doc, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The nurses moved me to a hospital bed, hooking me up to monitors and an IV. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by exhaustion and a dull, throbbing ache that seemed to settle into every part of my body. Tom pulled a chair up beside the bed. When you're up for it, we should talk to the park rangers, he said. They'll want to know about the bear. I nodded slowly. Yeah, they need to know. Sarah patted my arm gently. Get some rest first. You've been through hell and you need to recover. As the two of them left to grab a cup of coffee, I closed my eyes, letting the steady beep of the heart monitor lull me into a restless sleep. Even as I drifted off, the memory of the bear lingered, its growl, the weight of its body, the way its dark eyes seemed to pierce through me. No matter how much time passed, I knew I'd never forget those eyes. The hospital room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the heart monitor and the rhythmic sound of the IV drip. The sterile white walls felt cold, and the soft light from the window didn't do much to chase away the chill in my bones. My head was still foggy from the painkillers, but I could tell that I wasn't going to get much rest. The bed was uncomfortable, and the dull ache in my ribs was constant, reminding me of the attack. I heard the door open, and I turned my head to see Tom and Sarah standing in the doorway, both looking a little worn. They had been kind enough to stay with me for most of the night, and I could tell by their faces that they were worried. Morning, Mark, Tom said with a tired smile. He held up a cup of coffee. How are you feeling? I groaned and shifted on the bed, feeling the sharp pain shoot through my side. Like I've been run over by a truck, but I'll live. Good to hear. Sarah moved to the bedside and took a seat in the chair next to me. The doctors said you might need surgery if your ribs are fractured, but they'll do another round of tests this morning. We'll be here for you, okay? I nodded, swallowing against the dryness in my throat. Thanks, Sarah. I'm not sure what I would have done without you two. Tom sat on the edge of the other chair, rubbing his eyes. We just got lucky. We were only a few minutes away when we heard you yelling. I don't even want to think about what could have happened if we weren't there. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to push the images of the bear out of my mind. The way it had knocked me over so easily. The weight of it on top of me, its teeth and claws tearing through my jacket. Yeah, I don't want to think about it either. A nurse came in, interrupting the moment, and she went to work, checking the various tubes and monitors attached to me. I watched as she gently adjusted the IV, glancing up at me with a small smile. How are you feeling today, Mr. Ellis? Better, I guess, I muttered, my voice hoarse. Still hurts, though. She made a note on her clipboard. I'll have the doctor come by soon to go over your results. The x-rays came back and we're just waiting on the final reports. She adjusted the pillow behind my head, making sure I was comfortable. You're doing great, though. We'll get you healed up in no time. She left after a few minutes, and I sank back into the bed, letting my body relax for a moment. It had been a long night, and despite the pain, the exhaustion was starting to catch up with me. What's next? I asked, my voice quieter now. Tom shrugged, leaning back in his chair. Well, the hospital is the first stop. After that, I think we need to talk to the rangers, don't you? I winced, the thought of recounting the whole thing again, this time for authorities, feeling like a mountain I'd have to climb. Yeah, I guess so. I'll have to give them my report. But what if it doesn't change anything? I mean, what if it's just one of those things? Sarah reached over and took my hand in hers, giving it a reassuring squeeze. You can't think like that. This isn't just some freak accident. It's a bear that attacked you. They need to know about it. The next person who gets caught in the woods could be in even worse shape than you. I nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the two of them. They had no reason to stick around, yet here they were helping me through all of this. All right, I said, forcing a weak smile. I'll talk to the rangers. Let's just hope they believe me. The door opened again, and the doctor stepped inside, holding a clipboard and looking over the notes. He was tall with a sharp jawline and the air of someone who had seen it all, but his face softened when he saw me. "How are we doing this morning, Mr. Ellis?" he asked, setting the clipboard on the edge of the bed. "Same as before," I replied. "Pain's pretty bad, but I'm getting through it." The doctor nodded, scanning the reports. The X-rays came back clear. No fractures, just some bruising and soft tissue damage. You'll still be sore for a while, but there's no need for surgery. We'll get you some stronger pain meds to help with that. I let out a breath of relief, feeling the tension leave my body for the first time in what felt like forever. "That's good news." "Very good," the doctor agreed, smiling. "Slightly. We'll monitor you for a bit longer, but you're going to make a full recovery." "Thank God," I muttered, closing my eyes for a moment. The weight that had been pressing on my chest finally began to lift. He glanced at Tom and Sarah before turning back to me. "I'd like to recommend that you stay off your feet for a couple of weeks. No strenuous activity, especially no hiking, or jogging for obvious reasons." He gave me a pointed look and I nodded, feeling the sting of irony. "Yeah," I said. "I don't think I'll be running any trails for a while." The doctor chuckled softly. "Smart choice. I'll have the nurse bring in some discharge papers soon, and then we'll get you set up for the follow-up appointments. If anything changes, don't hesitate to call us." I thanked him again and he left the room, leaving me alone with Tom and Sarah once more. The quiet that settled in after his departure was heavy, but I was grateful for it. The worst seemed to be behind me, and the road to recovery wasn't going to be easy, but it wasn't impossible either. After a few moments, Tom cleared his throat and leaned forward. "So are you ready to go back to the trail?" I couldn't help but laugh bitterly, though it sent a sharp pain through my ribs. "Yeah, sure. I'll head out there as soon as I can. Maybe take a stroll through the woods, maybe run into a bear or two." Tom smirked, but his eyes were serious. "It's not funny, Mark, but I get it. You're going to have to face it at some point. The bear won't go away just because you ignore it." Sarah squeezed my hand again, her voice gentle. "You'll be okay. You'll get back out there when you're ready." I nodded, though. The fear still lingered in the back of my mind. The bear's eyes, its teeth, the weight of it on top of me. I wasn't sure I'd ever forget that. But I would heal. And maybe, just maybe one day, I'd be able to face the woods again. Not right now, but someday. The hospital room was starting to feel more like a cage than a sanctuary. The beeping of the heart monitor had become a constant reminder that I wasn't quite free yet, that the woods, those cursed woods, were still close, just outside the sterile walls. Despite the fact that I'd been discharged, the lingering terror of the bear attack followed me everywhere. The pain in my side had dulled, but it was far from gone. I was finally able to move without gritting my teeth, but every step felt like a betrayal to my body. I had been home for less than a day, and already the isolation was starting to get to me. The house felt too quiet, too still. The outside world was just a few feet away, but it might as well have been miles. It was late morning when Sarah and Tom showed up as they had promised. I was on the couch, trying to distract myself by flipping through a magazine, though I wasn't really reading. My mind kept drifting back to that moment in the woods, to the bear and the way it had watched me, as if I was something to be tested. I shuddered, shaking the thought away. "Morning," Sarah greeted me with a soft smile, though I could see the concern in her eyes. She sat beside me on the couch, her hand brushing against mine in comfort. "How's the pain?" "Manageable," I replied, forcing a smile. I wasn't about to tell her how much it still hurt every time I breathed too deeply. I'd been lucky, but it still felt like a piece of me had been torn away in the woods. I couldn't shake that feeling of helplessness. "Good," Sarah said, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "How are you holding up otherwise? It's been a rough couple of days." I'm fine," I said, my voice trailing off. "I just keep thinking about it, you know? Every time I close my eyes, I see that bear, hear the growl. It's like it's still out there, just waiting for me." Tom leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed over his chest. "It's normal, Mark. What you went through, it messes with your head. But you're not the first to be attacked, and you won't be the last. We just need to make sure we're keeping you safe from here on out." "Yeah, but how do you get back to normal after something like this?" I asked, meeting his gaze. "How do you go back to doing the things you used to love when the thing you feared most almost killed you?" Sarah's voice was softer now, a gentle understanding in her words. "You don't have to rush, Mark. It's okay to take your time. You've been through a trauma, and healing isn't just physical, it's mental too." I nodded slowly, absorbing her words. But despite the comfort in her voice, I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Not when the memory of the bear was etched so deeply in my mind. Tom cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "I know you're not ready to talk about it, but we've got to deal with the bear attack. The Rangers, they're going to need a full report. It's protocol." I let out a long breath, running a hand through my hair. "I know. I've been thinking about that. I mean, what's the point, right? It's just one bear. They'll do their little investigation, but nothing will really change. It'll just be another statistic, another wildlife encounter they can write off and move on from." "I get it," Sarah said quietly. "You're angry. You feel like they won't do anything to make sure it doesn't happen again. But you still need to report it. They have to know. Not just for you, but for anyone else who might be out there. They need to take this seriously." I sighed, feeling the weight of the words she spoke. I couldn't just let it go. "You're right," I said finally, rubbing my face. I don't know what good it'll do. Maybe I'm just tired of feeling like I'm the only one who sees how serious it really was." "You're not alone," Tom said, stepping into the room. "We're with you on this. If they don't take it seriously, then we keep pushing. We get the attention it deserves." I looked at them both, grateful for their support, but also feeling a deep sense of reluctance. "I'll talk to the Rangers," I muttered. "But it's just... God, it's hard, you know." Tom nodded. "I know. It's hard to relive something like that. But you're stronger than you realize, Mark. We all are." The afternoon passed slowly. I spent most of it sitting on the couch, my thoughts drifting in and out of clarity, while Sarah and Tom made phone calls and made sure I was as comfortable as possible. Every time a car passed outside or the wind rustled through the trees, I jumped, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Later that evening, I found myself back at the park office, the ranger station where I'd given my initial report. The drive there had been agonizing, each turn and twist in the road reminding me of the winding trail that had led me straight into the bear's path. Tom had come with me, offering quiet support, while Sarah stayed back at my house to rest. She'd said she'd call later, but for now it was just me and Tom in the small nondescript ranger station. When we entered, the ranger behind the desk looked up, his face a mix of concern and professionalism. He was an older man, with graying hair and weathered skin. His name tag read Ranger Mitchell. "Mr. Ellis," he greeted, his voice calm but firm. "We've got your report. Thank you for coming in." "Yeah," I said, sitting down across from him, my hands clenched tightly in my lap. "I wanted to follow up. I don't know if you're going to do anything about it, but I don't want this just getting swept under the rug." Ranger Mitchell leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied me. "We take these incidents seriously, Mr. Ellis. Black bear attacks are rare, but they do happen. Your report has already been filed, and we'll take it from here. We'll investigate the area, set up more monitoring, and make sure others are informed." I shook my head, frustration building inside me. "That's it? Just more monitoring? I was attacked. You don't think there's a real danger here? What if the next person isn't so lucky?" The ranger didn't flinch, his expression steady. "We'll keep a closer eye on that section of the trail, and I'm sure we'll put out a warning. But a single attack doesn't mean there's an immediate threat. Bears are animals, they act on instinct." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "But what if it comes back?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "What if it attacks again?" He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "We'll be prepared. We're doing what we can, but we can't just shut down the trail. People come here for a reason." I felt the blood rush to my head, and for a moment the room seemed to spin. "That's not enough," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's not enough." Ranger Mitchell didn't respond. Instead, he gave me a sympathetic nod. "You'll be all right, Mr. Ellis. Just stay safe out there." As Tom and I left the ranger station, the weight of the conversation settled over me. The bear had nearly killed me, and all they were offering was a warning and a few extra cameras on the trail. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. They had no real plans, no real solutions, and that made me feel like just another statistic, another person who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that thought was almost as terrifying as the attack itself. It had been almost a week since the bear attack, and the memories still felt like they were pressing on my chest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw its dark, wild eyes staring at me, the way its massive frame had loomed over me as I struggled to break free. But the physical wounds were healing, slowly, and the doctors said I was doing better than expected. Still, the mental scars were harder to ignore. That morning, as I sat in my living room with a cup of coffee, the sharp pain in my ribs was a constant reminder that I wasn't quite back to normal. But the worst part wasn't the physical ache. It was the uneasy silence of the house. The way my eyes kept scanning the woods outside the window, the way my muscles tensed whenever a car passed by, or a tree branch moved in the breeze. I was jumpy, always waiting for something to happen. The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a split second, the fear that had become my constant companion made my heart race. I forced myself to stand up, my legs feeling heavy beneath me. The pain was still there, but I wasn't going to let it control me. When I opened the door, it was Sarah and Tom standing there, both of them looking as if they hadn't slept much. Their faces were lined with concern, but there was a sense of urgency in their eyes that made my stomach tighten. "Hey, Mark." Sarah greeted me with a tired smile. "How are you doing?" "About as good as I can be," I replied, stepping aside to let them in. "But I'm starting to feel like I'm going stir-crazy in here. I need to get out of this house." Tom glanced out the window, his gaze lingering on the trees that lined the edge of the property. "We know it's been tough, but we've been thinking. You need to face it." I frowned, my chest tightening. "Face what?" "The woods," Sarah said softly. "You're not going to heal mentally if you don't face your fear. You have to go back to the trail. Not today, but soon. It's the only way you're going to find closure." I stared at her, unsure how to respond. The thought of going back to that trail, the place where the bear had nearly killed me, made my stomach turn. The idea of being anywhere near that forest again felt like a betrayal to everything I had just survived. "Are you crazy?" I said, my voice a little sharper than I intended. "I can't go back there, not after what happened." "We're not saying you have to go alone," Tom added quickly, his voice calm. "But you need to face it. You can't just hide forever. It's not healthy." I shook my head, unable to even imagine stepping back onto that trail. The thought of it made my breath catch in my throat, a physical reaction to the terror that was still lodged deep inside me. "I'm not ready for that," I muttered, staring down at my hands. They were shaking, and I clenched them into fists to stop the movement. "I don't think I'll ever be ready." "Mark," Sarah said gently, "you don't have to go today, but you need to start thinking about it. You need to take control of this fear before it takes control of you. If you keep avoiding it, it will only get worse." Tom leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. "We're not saying you should rush. Take it one step at a time. But don't let it fester. Don't let it eat away at you." I opened my mouth to argue, but then I stopped. Tom and Sarah were right. I could feel it inside me, the fear that was always lurking just beneath the surface, waiting to break through. It wasn't going to go away on its own, and if I didn't confront it, I might never be able to get back to the life I had before. "Okay," I said finally, the word feeling heavy in my mouth. "But not today. I'm not ready for that." "That's fine," Sarah said, relief flashing across her face. "We're not asking you to go right now, but let's make a plan. You don't have to do it alone, and we'll be with you every step of the way." "Yeah," Tom added with a half smile. "We'll get you back out there, one way or another." For the first time since the attack, I allowed myself a small, shaky smile. It was going to be hard, but I didn't want to live in fear anymore. I wanted to take control of my life again, even if it meant facing the very thing that had nearly destroyed me. The next few days passed in a blur. I kept myself busy with small tasks around the house, though every time I passed by the window, I couldn't help but glance at the woods. The trees seemed to stare back at me, and I felt the weight of the forest's presence pressing down on me. But at least I was trying. I hadn't given up. On Friday afternoon, Tom showed up at my door, again this time with more determination in his step. "You ready?" he asked, his voice steady. But there was an edge to it now, something that told me he wasn't going to let me back out. I glanced at him and nodded, swallowing the knot in my throat. "Yeah, let's go." We drove to the trailhead in silence, the weight of the moment hanging between us. When we arrived, I hesitated, standing by the car and staring at the path that seemed so innocuous at first glance. The trees stood tall and unmoving, but to me, they felt like a trap. The familiar hum of the forest, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of a bird, it all felt alien now, tainted by what had happened. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Tom nodded, standing beside me. "You don't have to run. We'll take it slow, just walk the path. You don't have to do anything more than that." I breathed in deeply, trying to calm the wild thumping of my heart. "Okay, just walk. I can do that." We started down the trail slowly, the air thick with the smell of pine and damp earth. My steps were tentative at first, my gaze darting nervously between the trees. Every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of fear through me. But Tom was there beside me, walking at my pace, offering a quiet reassurance. "I'm here, Mark," he said softly. "You're not alone." The sound of our footsteps on the dirt path was the only noise for a while, until we reached the spot where it had happened. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. This was it, the moment I had been avoiding, the very place where everything had changed. Tom stopped beside me, but didn't say anything. He just let me stand there, letting the moment settle, and for the first time since the attack I realized something. I was still alive. I had made it through, and maybe, just maybe, I could keep moving forward. "Let's keep going," I said, my voice stronger now. Tom gave me a smile, his hand resting briefly on my shoulder. "One step at a time, Mark, one step at a time." The days following our walk on the trail were quieter, but there was a tension in the air I couldn't shake. I had done it, taken that first step back into the woods. But even though the bear was long gone, the haunting presence of that day still lingered. The sight of the trees, the sharp sound of a twig snapping underfoot, the rustling of the leaves. It all felt too familiar, too close to what had happened. I was trying, though, trying to convince myself that I could move on. The people around me were patient, but I could see the way they looked at me sometimes. They wanted me to heal. They wanted me to be the person I used to be, the man who loved the outdoors, the one who never thought twice about a trail run. But that person felt like a stranger now, someone who had been swallowed up by fear. That morning, I found myself back at the ranger station, standing in front of Ranger Mitchell's desk. The same desk I had reported the bear attack to almost a week ago. I had avoided coming back here, but I knew it was time. Tom had convinced me that I needed to follow through. I had to be sure that everything was being taken seriously, that what had happened to me wasn't just another incident swept under the rug. Ranger Mitchell looked up from his desk when I walked in, his expression softening when he saw me. "Mr. Ellis, glad to see you up and about. How are you feeling?" "Better," I replied, though my voice was tight. I had been through enough to know that it wasn't just my body that needed healing. "I've been thinking a lot about the attack. I just wanted to check in, make sure something's being done." Mitchell nodded, adjusting his glasses as he sifted through some papers. "We've been monitoring the area. The bear's movements were logged, and we've increased patrols along that trail. But as we discussed before, it was a rare incident. A bear protecting its territory, not something we see often." "That's what I'm worried about," I said, my tone more urgent than I intended. "What if it's not just one bear? What if it's more? What if it happens again?" He met my gaze, his expression hardening just slightly. "I understand your concern, Mr. Ellis, I do. But the fact remains that the bear acted out of instinct. It wasn't a sustained threat. The odds of another bear attacking a human in the same area are incredibly low." "I don't think you're hearing me," I said, my frustration rising. "It wasn't just instinct. That bear wasn't trying to chase me off. It was hunting. It was stalking me, and I was just lucky it didn't finish what it started." Ranger Mitchell set the papers down, looking at me seriously. "I understand that you're scared, Mr. Ellis, but we've been doing this job a long time, and while your experience was traumatic, it doesn't necessarily point to a larger issue. The room seemed to close in around me, and I had to resist. The urge to leave. The fear was starting to rise again, that same feeling I had when I was first attacked. They were telling me it was over, that I should just move on, but I couldn't. Not when everything inside me was screaming that it wasn't over. I looked down, swallowing hard, and for a moment I considered walking out, but I wasn't going. To let it go this time. "I don't care what the odds are," I said, forcing myself to meet his eyes. "I was there. I saw what happened. And if you don't take this seriously, if you just keep writing it off as some freak incident, you're going to let it happen again. You're going to let someone else get hurt." Ranger Mitchell took a breath, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Concern, maybe, or doubt. "What do you want me to do, Mr. Ellis?" "I don't know," I said, my voice quiet now but firm. "I don't have all the answers, but I do know that if you're just going to watch and wait, it's not enough. You have to make sure no one else ends up like me." Mitchell was silent for a long moment, his fingers tapping lightly on the desk. Finally, he nodded. "We'll send out more patrols, increase our signage along the trail. I'll personally make sure this is monitored more closely. I'll also notify the local wildlife department. If there's any indication of unusual behavior from the bears in the area, we'll address it." I nodded, though a part of me felt unsatisfied. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough. But for now, it was the best I was going to get. Later that evening, I was back at home, sitting on the couch with a cold beer in my hand. Tom had insisted I relax, and Sarah had called to check in, but I couldn't shake the feeling of restlessness. There was too much uncertainty, too many unanswered questions about what had really happened that day. I wasn't sure if I would ever have the answers, but I couldn't stop wondering what would happen if the next person wasn't so lucky. The doorbell rang, and I stood up, surprised by the sound. It was late, later than I expected anyone to be stopping by. When I opened the door, I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but it definitely wasn't the sight of Sarah standing there, her face pale and drawn. "Sarah," I asked, my voice suddenly tight. "What's going on?" She stepped inside. Without waiting for an invitation, her eyes wild, her breath coming in short bursts. "Mark, we need to go, now." "Go where? What's happening?" I felt my chest tighten with fear. She grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the door. "There's been another attack. It's on the same trail. Someone else was hurt." The blood drained from my face as her words hit me. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt the floor shift beneath me. No way," I muttered. "How is that possible?" "We don't know yet," she said, her voice shaking. "But we need to get there before anyone else does. It's bad, Mark. Really bad." "Did you call the authorities?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I did," Sarah said, her face grim, "but I wanted to make sure you knew first. They're still looking into it." I felt like I was moving in slow motion, but somehow we were already in the car, speeding toward the trail. The world outside seemed to blur as I gripped the door handle tightly. My mind raced, but all I could think about was one thing: the bear. Had it come back? Had it followed me? Or was it just another random incident? When we reached the trailhead, I saw the flashing lights of emergency vehicles, their sirens slicing through the quiet night. I didn't need anyone to tell me what had happened. I already knew. "Stay here," Sarah ordered as she parked the car. "I'll go see what I can find out." "No way," I said, my voice hoarse. "I'm going with you." She didn't argue, but she looked at me with concern. "You don't have to do this, Mark. You've been through enough." "I'm going," I said firmly, getting out of the car before she could protest. We walked toward the gathering crowd, and I could see the figures of park rangers and paramedics huddled together, their voices hushed. I couldn't get any closer. There were too many people, too many officials. So I stood just outside the perimeter watching. And in the distance I saw the shape of the bear again. It was in my mind now, a constant shadow. Would it ever leave? The air felt thick with tension as Sarah and I stood outside the emergency area where the latest attack had taken place. The flashing lights of the police cars and ambulances illuminated the night, casting harsh, surreal shadows across the forest. The wind had picked up, rustling through the trees, but it didn't soothe the raw unease coiling in my gut. The familiar sting of fear still gripped me, and it felt as though my body hadn't yet adjusted to the unsettling idea that the forest The place I once considered home wasn't a safe haven anymore. Sarah was tense beside me, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her jaw set. She hadn't said much since we'd arrived, her eyes constantly flicking between the paramedics working in the clearing and the rangers talking in hushed tones. There were no easy words to offer, not after the terror that had just unfolded on that same trail, the one where my own life had almost been taken just a week ago. "Did you hear anything?" I asked, my voice strained as I leaned closer to Sarah. The words came out more as a rasp than anything coherent. I wasn't sure. I wanted to know the details, but the need for answers pushed me forward. Sarah shook her head, her face pale under the harsh lights. "Not much. The victim's in critical condition. They're taking them to the hospital now. A woman, early 40s, didn't get much from her statement before they rushed her off. Something about hearing footsteps then. Then it all happened." "So fast?" My stomach dropped and I had to swallow hard. "Footsteps," I muttered, the memory of those same sounds echoing in my mind. The way the bear had stalked me, moving so silently, as though it had been hunting. I couldn't push the images away, couldn't escape the weight of what I had survived. Before I could speak again, a voice broke through the silence. It was one of the rangers, a man who had been working the trail when I first made my report. His name was Ben, and he looked even more exhausted now, his face drawn and grim. "Mr. Ellis," he greeted me, his tone soft but laced with concern. "I'm sorry you're having to deal with this again. It's not the news anyone wanted." I nodded, not trusting my voice for a moment. "What happened? How bad is it?" Ben glanced around, making sure no one was listening, before he spoke in a low voice. "It's bad, Mark. She was attacked in the same spot you were. Right near that curve on the trail. Just like you, she didn't see it coming. We're still trying to figure out what exactly happened, but it's clear the bear wasn't just defending itself. It wasn't just some chance encounter. It's like it was targeting her." My blood ran cold and I felt my knees wobble beneath me. I steadied myself by gripping the edge of a nearby car, my pulse spiking. The fear I had buried deep inside me surged back, raw and unfiltered. "It's the same bear, isn't it?" I asked, the question hanging in the air between us, though I already knew the answer. The pieces clicked together in my mind, everything that had happened to me, and now this. Ben didn't answer right away, his eyes shifting, his hands flexing as though he were unsure how much to say. But the silence was enough. "We think so, Mark. The bear's behavior is consistent, but we don't have definitive proof yet. We're still working on tracking it." I shook my head in disbelief. "You're telling me that after everything, after the attack on me, no one was keeping track of this bear?" My voice cracked on the last word. I could feel the anger and helplessness rising in my chest, and it took everything I had to hold it together. Ben stepped forward, his expression apologetic. "We've been monitoring the area, but the forest is vast and bears move fast. We can't anticipate every move, and this particular bear has been careful about staying out of sight. We thought we could handle it." "You thought?" The word came out like a bitter laugh, and I couldn't stop the edge in my voice. "You thought you could handle it? Look where we are now." "Mark, I'm sorry," Ben said quickly, raising his hands in a gesture of apology. "I didn't mean it like that. I know this is hard, but we're doing everything we can to track it. We're not letting this slide, I promise you that." I wanted to believe him, I really did. But the truth was, the bear was out there, and it was dangerous. And I had no idea how much longer it would take before it made its next move. The wind howled through the trees, a low, mournful sound, as if the forest itself were grieving for what had happened. I couldn't stop the chill that spread through me, nor could I escape the sinking feeling that I had failed somehow, that I should have done more to stop it. "Is the victim going to be okay?" Sarah asked, her voice quieter than before, but still full of worry. Ben hesitated before answering. "They're doing everything they can, but it's touch and go. She's lost a lot of blood, and there's deep tissue damage. It's too soon to tell." I let out a slow breath, feeling helplessness crawl over me. The victim was someone else's family, someone else's loved one, and I couldn't shake the thought that it could have been me again, just as easily, just as quickly. "We need to make sure this doesn't happen again," I said, the words heavy with determination. Ben nodded, his face grim. We're doing our best, Mark. I'll keep you updated. We're increasing patrols, setting up more cameras, and we'll start trapping to get a better understanding of where the bear is. But it's going to take time. Time. I wanted to scream at him. How much more time? How many more people would have to suffer before something was done? Thank you, I said, though the words felt hollow. Just make sure it doesn't happen again. Ben gave me a solemn nod, his eyes full of regret. We will. As Ben walked away, Sarah and I stood there in the quiet aftermath of it all, the weight of the situation settling in. I could hear the sirens fading in the distance, a reminder that life would go on, even as I struggled to find a way to live with what had happened. I should have done something more, I said softly, my voice barely a whisper, though I knew Sarah could hear me. She placed a gentle hand on my arm, her touch warm but firm. You did what you could, Mark. Don't blame yourself. No one knew the bear would come back like this. But I should have known, I muttered, staring out into the forest. The darkness seemed to close in around me. I should have done more. You can't carry that weight, Sarah said, her voice steady. What's important now is that you're here and you're helping. That's all anyone can do. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The words didn't feel like enough. Not when I knew the danger was still out there, lurking in the shadows, of the forest waiting for the next moment to strike. The forest seemed darker now, more menacing. But I had no choice. I had to stay. Had to keep fighting for myself, for the woman who had been hurt, and for everyone else who would walk that trail in the future. The fight wasn't over, and I wasn't going to let fear win. The days blurred together after the second attack. I spent most of my time holed up in my house, pacing between the windows, looking out at the trees, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Sarah and Tom had been by regularly, offering support and trying to get me to leave the house. But every time I stepped outside, I felt a shiver of panic crawl up my spine. The woods were no longer a place of comfort. They were a silent predator waiting to strike again. It was a few days after the second attack that I received a call from the ranger station. The voice on the other end was familiar. Ben, the same. Ranger I had spoken to after my own attack. He had been working tirelessly to track the bear, but I hadn't heard from him in a while. As soon as I picked up the phone, I could hear the weight in his voice. Mark, we need to talk. It's about the bear. My heart skipped a beat, the words hanging in the air between us. What's going on? I asked, already bracing myself for the worst. It's not good, Ben said. We've been tracking it, and we've found signs of the bear. But it's not in the area we thought it would be. It's moving farther out, and we're worried it's getting more aggressive. My stomach dropped, and I felt the blood drain from my face. What does that mean? Are you saying it's coming back? No, Ben said quickly. Not necessarily, but the bear's behavior is changing. We're seeing more signs of it being active during the day, which isn't typical, and it's been circling back to the areas where the attacks happened. I rubbed my temples, trying to make sense of it all. The bear was shifting from a natural predator to something more dangerous. It had tasted blood, and it wasn't finished. What are you doing to stop it? I asked, my voice low and tight. We've been setting up more traps, but it's been moving around the traps. We've got more patrols out, but the bear's avoiding them. We're putting up more cameras to try and get a better idea of its movements. I could feel the weight of the words pressing down on me, suffocating me. So it's just out there somewhere waiting? Ben was silent for a moment before he answered. Pretty much. I'm not going to lie to you, Mark. We're doing everything we can, but there's only so much we can do. This bear's smart. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. It was a predator, a force of nature, and we were nothing but prey. The authorities were doing what they could, but there was no guarantee they would be able to stop it before it claimed more lives. I felt the anger rise in me, mixing with the dread. This can't keep happening. You have to do more. I know, Ben said quietly. We're on it. But I need you to understand, we can't always predict what an animal like this will do. It's not always about human intervention. Sometimes nature takes its course. Nature takes its course, I repeated, my voice shaking. What about the people who get caught in the middle? Are they just supposed to be collateral damage? I could hear Ben take a deep breath on the other end of the line. Mark, I know you're upset, but there's a limit to what we can control. We'll get it, I promise. Just Stay inside, okay? Let us do our job." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The words felt empty, hollow, like nothing anyone could say would make a difference now. The bear had already changed everything, and no matter how many patrols they sent or traps they set, it was clear that the damage had already been done. People were going to get hurt. More people. When I hung up the phone, I felt a cold pit in my stomach. The walls of my house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. I couldn't just sit here waiting for the next attack to happen. I had to do something. But what? What could I possibly do that the authorities weren't already doing? I stood up, pacing the living room again, my thoughts spinning in a chaotic whirl. I couldn't just wait for the inevitable to happen. I had to find a way to stop this. And then, like a flash of lightning in my mind, an idea formed. The only way to really track this bear was to get out there myself, to find it before it found someone else. "Mark?" Sarah's voice interrupted my thoughts, and I turned to see her standing in the doorway. She had that look on her face, the one that told me she knew something was wrong. "I have to do something," I said, my voice hoarse with determination. "I have to go out there and find it." "What?" she asked, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Are you out of your mind?" "You can't go back out there, not after everything." "I don't have a choice," I snapped, the frustration boiling over. "The authorities are doing what they can, but they can't do enough. No one is taking this seriously, Sarah. People are going to get hurt, and if I don't do something, I'll never forgive myself." Sarah stepped into the room, her face softening with concern. "Mark, please. I get it. I understand why you're angry, why you're scared, but going out there on your own isn't going to change anything. It'll only make it worse. The bear's not going to care that you're out there." I ran a hand through my hair, the weight of it all pressing down on me. "I have to do something, Sarah. I can't just sit here and wait for someone else to be attacked. I can't let this thing keep terrorizing the people around here." "Mark," she said, stepping closer and placing a hand on my arm, "I know how you feel. I'm scared too. But you can't do this alone. Let us help you. We'll figure out another way to stop it." I shook my head, the cold determination still gnawing at me. I'm going out there, and I'm not asking for anyone's permission." "Mark, don't..." But I was already walking toward the door, grabbing my jacket, my mind made up. I couldn't stop now, not when everything inside me was screaming that I needed to do something. I had to face this. I had to face the bear. As I opened the door, Sarah's voice called after me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I wasn't just running anymore. I was hunting. The woods would answer for what had happened, and I was going to make sure of it. The night was colder than I expected as I walked through the dense underbrush of the forest. My boots crunched over the leaves, the sound unnervingly loud in the stillness. My breath came in short bursts, forming mist in the cold air as I pushed deeper into the woods. The moon was barely visible through the thick canopy above, casting the forest floor in eerie half-light. I hadn't told Sarah or Tom where I was. Going? I couldn't. I knew they would try to stop me, and I didn't have the patience for their concerns anymore. The fear that had taken root in me after the attack had twisted into something else, something raw and dangerous. I wasn't going to let this thing, this bear, control me anymore. I had to find it. I had to take control of the situation. The trees around me towered like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands, clawing at the night. The familiar, comforting scent of pine and earth was now tainted with a sense of dread. The further I went, the more I felt the weight of the forest pressing in on me. I knew the bear was out here somewhere, stalking the very trail I had once run, without a second thought. I had been prepared for this moment. I'd come into the woods with a sense of grim determination, thinking I could face whatever came my way. But the deeper I ventured, the more I felt that gnawing fear creeping up from the pit of my stomach. The bear's growl echoed in my mind, the weight of its presence still so fresh, as if the forest itself had remembered the attack. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves had me spinning around, my heart racing in my chest. I was on high alert, adrenaline coursing through my veins, and yet the longer I walked, the more the reality of the situation sank in. I was out here alone. No one knew where I was. If anything went wrong, there was no one to help me. My breath hitched as I heard something move in the distance, the faintest shuffle of leaves. I froze, straining to listen, my heart pounding in my ears. Then I heard it again, closer this time, a sharp, low growl. My blood turned to ice. It was the bear. I didn't wait. The fear that had been simmering in my chest boiled over, and I broke into a run. Branches whipped at my face, the sharp sting making it hard to see, but I didn't slow down. My instincts were telling me to get out of the woods, to get back, to safety, but my feet carried me forward. The forest was no longer just a place I used to love. It was a battleground, and I was going to face the monster that had almost killed me. Suddenly the trees parted, and I found myself in a small clearing. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I scanned the area. The bear was close. I could feel it. The air was thick with tension, and then, from the shadows, it emerged. The black bear stepped into the moonlight, its eyes glowing with a primal hunger. It was massive, its dark fur rippling as it moved, each step slow and deliberate. It locked eyes with me, and for a moment I thought I might faint from the sheer terror of it. This was the same bear that had attacked me. There was no mistaking it. I could hear my heart thudding in my ears as the bear took another step toward me, its powerful muscles rippling beneath its thick fur. It sniffed the air, its nose twitching as if it could smell my fear. Its breath came in heavy huffs, and I could see the glint of its teeth as it growled, low and threatening. I took a step back, my legs trembling. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I didn't move. I couldn't. I had come out here to face it, and I wasn't going to back down now. The memories of the attack, the weight of the bear on top of me flooded my mind, but I forced myself to breathe through it. This wasn't the same. I wasn't the same. The bear took another step closer, and this time I didn't wait. I lunged to the side, narrowly avoiding its massive paw as it swiped at me. The sheer force of the movement sent a shockwave through the air, and I stumbled, my feet slipping on the uneven ground. It growled again, this time louder, more menacing, and I knew that it was playing with me. It wasn't trying to kill me outright. Not yet. It was testing me. The fear that had been festering inside me now turned into something else, something that pushed me forward. I wasn't just going to survive this, I was going to make it fight for every inch. I grabbed a branch from the ground, holding it, like a makeshift weapon as I turned to face the bear. My breath came in ragged bursts, my chest aching from the effort. I couldn't back down now. I had come too far. The bear lunged again, faster this time, but I was ready. I swung the branch with all my strength, connecting with its side. The bear recoiled, its growl turning into an angry snarl. But it didn't retreat. It was stronger than anything I had ever faced. I stumbled back, my mind racing for a way out, but there was no way out. I had to fight. I had to take control. And then something clicked. I remembered the advice that had been given to me after the first attack. Stay calm, make yourself big, and don't run. Running would only make me a target. I wasn't going to make that mistake again. I stood my ground, lifting the branch high and shouting at the bear, hoping to intimidate it. "Get back," I yelled, though my voice trembled. The bear paused, its head tilting slightly, as if confused by my sudden aggression. It was a moment of hesitation, a crack in its confidence, and I seized it. I charged at the bear, swinging the branch toward its face. The bear swiped at me, but I ducked, narrowly avoiding its claws as they slashed through the air. The bear growled, more frustrated than anything else, and took a step back. It wasn't retreating. It was calculating, figuring out what I would do next, but I wasn't going to let it get the upper hand again. I wasn't going to be the prey. For a few seconds, everything seemed to slow down. My mind was racing, my pulse hammering in my ears, but my body moved with purpose. I raised the branch again, ready to strike, when I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. "Mark!" a voice shouted. I turned, but the bear had already made its move. The world went black. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the ground, my head throbbing, my body aching in places I didn't even know existed. The bear was gone, and I could hear voices in the distance. Tom's voice, Sarah's. They were calling my name, their voices filled with panic. "Mark, are you okay?" Tom's voice was frantic as he knelt beside me, his hands gently checking my injuries. "What the hell were you thinking?" I groaned, my body feeling like it had been run over by a truck, but I managed to look up at him, forcing a weak smile. I thought, I thought I could stop it, I muttered, my voice weak and strained. You're lucky you didn't get yourself killed, Sarah said, her voice shaky with relief. What the hell were you doing? Out here, Mark. I couldn't let it keep happening, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I had to face it. I had to stop it. Tom looked at me, his expression softening with concern. We'll stop it together, okay, but not like this. Not alone. I nodded weakly, realizing he was right. I had gone out there thinking I could handle it, but in the end, it wasn't. Just about fighting the bear. It was about knowing when to ask for help. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized that I wasn't alone anymore.